Joe Wilder?
Well, first of all, Joe Wilder was just a wonderful musician. I mean, his tone was so distinctive, and it was such, purity about his playing. But I had the good fortune of getting to know Joe because of his friendship with my dear friend Ed Berger. Ed and Joe really hit it off. They were both amateur photographers. They both could have been professional. Ed is wonderful, and so was Joe. They had that in common. And Ed, of course, wound up writing Joe's biography and discography, which was a hell of a job that Ed did there, because Joe made so many records as a side person, and some of them are not really mainstream jazz, and Ed figured all that out, and it's a little masterpiece of discography. But the thing about Joe is that he was such a sweet person, and had a really great sense of humor, but he loved to tell jokes, and they were always bad, bad jokes. And when he emceed, when he had his own group, he would also do little puns and stuff. The most amazing thing about Joe from a personal standpoint was his romance with the woman who became his wife, who was Swedish, and it's in the biography. But what he did, they met when he was on tour, and it included Sweden, and he fell in love with her, and she with him. And her parents were not too happy about this. I mean, we always have the idea that Europeans are totally without prejudice and that stuff, right? Then you have to think about the Holocaust and think again, But what happened was that Joe taught himself Swedish. And the rest good thing, he wrote a letter in Swedish to her, nautically. He came back, and this so endeared her parents to him that everything was all right, and it became a wonderful marriage. But Joe was, Ed started his label, Evening Star, with support from Benny Carter, who loved Joe. And Ed's real reason for starting that label was that he felt that Joe wasn't being recorded enough as a leader, and he had plenty of sideman stuff, but he wanted to really. And Evening Star is really named for Benny Carter because that's a tune by Benny. So this label managed to create some really fine Joe Wilder records, where Joe was really able to, do things he wanted to do. Have you read the biography? Yes. So the biography has these things that I didn't know about Joe, because Joe was anything but an egocentric person. He did not talk much about himself. He talked about his father, who lived to be 100, and he would talk about experiences and so on, but he never, he had no egomania at all. He was anything but a Donald Trump kind of guy. So what was I saying this for? Yeah, in the biography, you learn about stuff like Joe being in the Marines, as a black man, and how that was. And it was interesting to me, especially. I'd never known about that, and Joe's personality, because he's a mild-mannered guy. How he was able to deal with that, and he dealt with it very well, obviously. But I was thinking about another jazz Marine, is Buddy Rich, who encountered a lot of anti-Semitism, and how he dealt with it, and it makes an interesting comparison. But Joe was, and he was a really good photographer, and he loved to do that. That was really his favorite pastime. And he was very dedicated to his family. He had how many? I think at least two. The one daughter whom I met, and he was, you know, I think people don't have the image of jazz musicians that was prevalent, you know, for about in the 30s and 40s, you know. But Joe was such a, you know, he was really. You said earlier about Teddy Wilson, you know, but Joe was like that. He was a, you know, a thoroughly civilized person.
He was a gentleman.
He was an absolute gentleman, yeah. And he never, Ed and I used to talk about that, we never saw Joe without a tie. Never saw Joe without a tie. He's never has been an open collar, yes. Even, you know, on an everyday basis. It was really a sharp dresser, not anything attention grabbing, but very good taste. And good taste is what, you know, exemplifies his playing. He was with Basie for he talks about being with Lionel Hampton that he didn't like at all, but with Basie, he wasn't with Basie very long, but he didn't mind that. But there is one thing that he's featured on, which in mood is kind of a predecessor to Little Darling, but I forget what it's called. It really features Joe, and it's very slow and pretty. He is, for, you know, while he was, obviously while he was still alive, he was the only survivor from that wonderful television show, Jazz.
Sound of Jazz.
Yeah. He was the last one. And that's where, in that band that's led by Basie, all the trumpets take a solo, and Joe has to follow Roy. Roy was explosive that day. He told me afterwards, he said, I had my whistling chops, and that was a thing of his, you know, that on certain days he would have his whistling chops, and that's when he would go way up. That show has, when we were talking about Basie, it has such a lovely moment when there's the big band and Basie is at the piano, and Billy comes up to him and says something to him that makes him laugh, and they're both smiling. It's such a, you know, it's something that you wouldn't expect on a television show, but the whole show was very natural. Coleman Hawkins pulling up a chair next to Monk when Monk is playing, and obviously showing his approval. You know, they're working on the facade of the building, so when you occasionally...
All right, let's stop with that.